This is the Red Line, and I am your host, Jimmy Red. Week 3 of the NFL season is over. Week 4 is officially going to kick off on Thursday night when the Rams face the Minnesota Vikings in LA. I like the Rams to win that matchup. I think the Rams are fantastic. We're going to start this NFL off with a quick power rankings. Power rankings from Red, as Red would say it. Number 5. The number 5 team in the NFL, in Red's mind, is the Carolina Panthers. I think the Carolina Panthers are the 5th best team in the NFL. Why? They have Cam Newton, who looks versatile. Christian McCaffrey, different level than he was last year. A little bit of struggles on the wide receiving side with Torrey Smith, not quite catching it. So there are a little bit of struggles there, and they've solved a problem with getting a safety in Eric Reed. So solve some problems. I'm going to put Carolina in at 5. Number 4 team in the power rankings is the New Orleans Saints. They were not in it last week, but the New Orleans Saints look like the number 4 team in the NFL. Big win last week over Atlanta, which we're going to talk about here later on in this show. But a huge win by the Rams. Drew Brees looks very good this year. Running game still not quite like it was. He's doing a lot of passing to his running game, but we'll break that down. I got the New Orleans Saints in at 4. My number 3 team, Philadelphia Eagles, man. Philadelphia Eagles look phenomenal. Carson Wentz is back. They just beat the Indianapolis Colts. They sacked him to get that win. I have to put them in there. They haven't proven to me they're not that bad yet. So put the Eagles in at 3. Number 2, Kansas City Chiefs. I know it's early in the year, and their coach, Andy Reid, seems to find a way to win a lot of games early in the year. They got Patrick Mahomes, the hottest thing since sliced bread right now, and they're looking good. 3-0, Chiefs in at number 2. And the number 1 team, as I mentioned, the same team as last week, won again, has a huge matchup on Thursday night against Minnesota, and that would be the LA Rams. I think the LA Rams are the best team in the NFL. They're well-rounded. I understand a couple quarterbacks are not playing for them Thursday night, but they still have their rushers and Aaron Donald and Ndamukong Suh, and they still have their wide receivers and Brandon Cooks and Cooper Kupp, and they still got the quarterback in Jared Goff, and they got the smartest coach on the sidelines in Sean McVay. Best team in the NFL. So after the power rankings over, we want to get it started with Baker Mania. That's right, I said it, folks. Baker Mania is officially started in Cleveland. The Cleveland Browns have won a football game, folks. That's right. Hold on to yourself. The beer coolers are open, the Bud Lights are out, and people are partying in Cleveland. Yes, they were drinking Bud Lights. There was 10 coolers with 200 in each of Bud Lights that were unlocked when the Browns won. Browns won first time 635 days. Huge shout out to that Cleveland Browns fan base. You guys got that win. I'm happy for you. No franchise should ever have to go that long without seeing a win. So huge shout out to the Cleveland Browns. But those Cleveland Browns defeated a kid that I believe is a phenomenal one, and that being Sam Darnold. He didn't have a phenomenal game against them, but he also was playing a really good defense. You know, you got to worry about those first-round picks they got because they have quite a few of them there because they got Myles Garrett and they got Denzel Ward. So there's a lot of talent there on that side of the ball for Cleveland. And Sam Darnold has to worry about that. Sam Darnold is a young quarterback. He has hardly any wide receivers to throw the ball to. His best wide receiver that he has is Quincy Edmonds. So it's just not there. He doesn't have it yet. So I'm not a huge fan of what he has, but he's doing very well with what he's got. But I want to jump over to the Browns. Tyrod Taylor left the game with an injury. They put in Baker Mayfield, and it looked like a completely different football team. Baker Mayfield, when he stepped out there on that field, had control of that team from snap one. First throw of his NFL career, he planted that front foot and delivered an absolute bullet of a pass. And he had command of the offense ever since then. He went out there and won that game for the Cleveland Browns. He didn't have any touchdowns. He caught one receiving, but he did not throw one. He had 200 yards in throwing, had no mistakes on interceptions, but looked phenomenal out there throwing the football. The running side of the game even looked good for the Browns as well. Carlos Hyde ran like a true champion out there, 23 carries, 98 yards, almost had 100. So Carlos Hyde had a phenomenal game. And then you got Tyrod Taylor who ran for a little bit. And you can't forget about the rookie they got, Nick Chubb. Didn't make too big of an imprint in this game, but he's starting to slowly get more work, I could think, happening here in the near future. He only had 2 carries for 6 yards, but I think Nick Chubb's going to get more carries as we progress. The big target, though, we found out that Baker likes is Jarvis Landry, slot receivers, which isn't a huge surprise to me, considering Baker doesn't have that huge arm that a lot of people hear about. He does have an arm, but it's not the cannon that most people would think of. And he hit Jarvis Landry, who is mostly a slot guy, and he hit him 8 times for 103 yards. He didn't get any touchdowns because obviously Baker Mayfield did not throw any touchdowns to anyone, so no touchdowns for him. But the Browns on the board with the win. They got a compelling matchup this week. I'm ready to see if they can make it 2 in a row. It would be awesome to see it, but a huge win for the shout-out of Cleveland, so big win for the Browns. The next one I want to talk about is one that I was really excited to watch. And that was the 2-0 team entering Cincinnati Bengals. They were coming in and they were facing the 1-1 Carolina Panthers. And Andy Dalton had a phenomenal game if you don't look at the interception side of the board. He had 350 yards, 2 touchdowns, but he had 4 interceptions. That's where it hurt him out, was the interception side of the game. He loved hitting A.J. Green. I mean, A.J. Green was catching balls like crazy. And so was Tyler Eifert, his tight end. But the big guy he was hitting the whole time was his receiver, Tyler Boyd. Tyler Boyd was just everywhere that he needed to be. He caught 6 receptions, 132 yards, and a touchdown. Beautiful game by Tyler Boyd. He was really hooking up well with Andy Dalton that day. Their running game wasn't really there. Giovanni Bernard returning back home, graduated from the University of North Carolina. Did not have a game he really wanted to have. He only rushed for 61 yards on 12 carries, so not really the game he wanted, but he did score a touchdown here in Carolina, so that's big. Don't get me wrong there. He played his football at the University of North Carolina, but he is not from here. He is from Florida. So he is not a homer here to the state of North Carolina, folks. But on the other side of the ball, ladies and gentlemen, let me just tell you, Cam Newton looked phenomenal. Phenomenal. 150 yards throwing, which for Cam Newton's somewhere around average. You're going to get somewhere around 150 to 250 with Cam. Sometimes he really breaks out and has a phenomenal game. He threw for 2 touchdowns, but he also ran for 2 as well. So a huge day for Cam Newton, 4 total touchdowns for him. And the biggest breakout of the day was for the guy that a lot of people said needed to get more reps, and he got them this year, and he was going inside the tackles like a machine. And Christian McCaffrey, best career game he has ever had. I was on the edge of my seat the entire time watching this. He had 28 carries, 184 yards. His longest run was 45, and that's the longest he's had of his career. I was so ecstatic, man. That was one of the best games I've ever seen him play, professional, collegiate, however he's played. It was a beautiful game played by Christian McCaffrey. Everything was lining up for him. The blocks were lining up. He kept his legs moving when he got hit. He was breaking tackles. He was going in between the tackles. He was bouncing it outside. He was catching balls out of the backfield. He was hitting them on curl routes, just little everything. He looked phenomenal. That was the best game I've ever seen Christian McCaffrey play in his entire career. And I think it's only going to get better from here, folks. Christian McCaffrey is the real deal, folks. Real deal. And then that other guy they brought in to be his backup doesn't get a whole lot of work. That being C.J. Anderson, that would be the guy they brought in from Denver. He only had 2 carries for 9 yards. I think he might start getting a little bit more work later on in the year. Reason being, they're going to want to try to relax Christian McCaffrey as much as possible once they get more towards the playoffs and they become playoff bound, which I believe they win their conference. So I don't see why they won't become playoff bound. But I think C.J. Anderson gets more reps later on in the year. They just save him as best as possible. Devin Funchess had a fantastic game as well. We all know Devin Funchess is a kid that we got out of Michigan a couple years ago. 4 receptions, 67 yards, and a touchdown. So a good game by him. The rookie, DJ Moore, only had 1 reception for 3 yards. So still trying to get him on track of what he needs to do. He's not quite there yet, but they're working on it. And I know Cam really wants to work with him and get stuff lined up. So in the few weeks I think coming up, I think Carolina finds a way to get back into him. And they just signed a safety, which was their big weak point with Eric Ross. So not Ross, Eric Reed. I saw Ross here. He plays for the Bengals. That's John Ross. But they just signed Eric Reed as a safety. As you guys know, Eric Reed is the one who does the protest. He was one of the guys who started all that. But that's neither here nor there. They signed him to a one-year deal to play safety for the Panthers. I think that is fantastic. That is a position they needed to fill. And if they did not fill it, it was going to be a big, big problem in the secondary. They don't have to worry about linebackers. Their cornerbacks are pretty good, but the safety was a problem. Carolina solved it. We were off this week. They are on a bye and they will be back next week in Week 5 to play football. And I'm excited to see what they look like, considering they brought him in at the right time to get him trained up on a week off. So a huge pickup there by the Panthers as they won against the Bengals after this matchup, 31-21. Another compelling matchup in the NFC South. One that was it's crazy. It was the Saints and Atlanta. Went into overtime. Atlanta never touched the football. Drew Brees drove his team down the field and won the game in overtime. And it was phenomenal. Matt Ryan, 374 yards and 5 touchdowns. Beautiful game by him. But I have a thing here on my computer where I have looked at, there is a comparison they showed. Drew Brees was 30 for 38, 325 yards and 3 touchdowns. Matt Ryan, 26 for 34, 376 yards and 5 touchdowns. At one point, these quarterbacks combined for a total of like 12 missed passes. That's incredible. It was fascinating to watch this game and just see the brilliance of two quarterbacks play the game of football. Because there wasn't much of a running game on the side for Atlanta. Atlanta didn't have much of a running game. Devontae Freeman was hurt, so they relied on Coleman, who had a huge game against Carolina, but struggled against New Orleans. Coleman only carried the ball 15 times, 33 yards, longest being a 15-yard run. He had no touchdown, so he basically averaged about 2 yards a carry. For a running back, that's not too stellar. Alvin Kamara had 16 carries for New Orleans on 66 yards with no touchdowns, but as a team running the ball, they had 143 yards. So huge running difference there between teams. You had 48, 143. Passing total for New Orleans, you had 396 yards from Drew Brees, 3 touchdowns. He had a QBR of 91. Matt Ryan, 374 yards, 5 touchdowns. That was a big day for them. And he is really, really liking Calvin Ridley. Loving him. He's finding him more than he's finding Julio Jones, folks. He found Calvin Ridley 3 times in that game for touchdowns. He threw it to Coleman as well one time from Indiana, but he didn't have any rushing touchdowns, as I mentioned. He found Tevin Coleman on a passing touchdown, but Calvin Ridley was on fire that game. 3 receiving touchdowns by Calvin Ridley. He also hit Mohamed Sanu for 1 as well, so spread the ball out very evenly, but that wide receiver, Calvin Ridley, the one they drafted this year out of Alabama, looks phenomenal. I think it's going to be a great fit there. As I mentioned when they drafted him, now they just got to figure out how they're going to get Julio Jones back in the game for them to play, because now they look like they're really relying on Calvin Ridley. Drew Brees on the other side of the ball threw 2 people for over 100 yards. He threw Michael Thomas for over 100 and Alvin Kamara. Both he threw to for over 100. As I mentioned, he's using Alvin Kamara in the backfield, but he's using him more out of the backfield in a passing situation to run, but he's not really using him to run the ball. He had 124 yards receiving as a running back. He was only 5 yards under Michael Thomas, who had 129. They both had big games right there as well. So the receiving part of those teams have no problems. New Orleans got the better half in that game, 43-37. The game was in Atlanta, dropping Atlanta down to 1-2, moving New Orleans up to 2-1, putting them in a tie for the division in the NFC South with Carolina and Tampa, so a 3-way tie at the top in the NFC South. Competitive. Atlanta's the last team in the division, which is a shock to me. I had them finishing second behind Carolina, but early in the season, let's wait and see as New Orleans takes that win in Atlanta. Another one that I want to talk about was a matchup of head coach versus defensive coordinator, and that was Bill Belichick when he faced off against Matt Patricia. Sunday Night Football. Wow, wow, wow. Let me just say, compelling, folks. Compelling. I didn't see this one coming out the way it did because I didn't think Matt Patricia was ready to go. The Lions entered this game not winning anything entering. And I just thought they were going to stay that way because I know that Bill Belichick is a mastermind. But boy, was I wrong. Brady had a terrible game. He had 1 touchdown, 1 interception, only 133 yards. Running game, pretty much nothing as well. Sony Michel had 50 yards. The total of the team had 89. So nothing offensively going for that team whatsoever. Also, they did not play Melvin Gordon. He was inactive for that. I mean, not Melvin Gordon. They did not play Josh Gordon, who was inactive for that game. On the other side of the ball, Detroit's quarterback, Matt Stafford, threw for 263, one interception, and 2 touchdowns. But the running game, and Kerryon Johnson, who is the kid that is a rookie this year out of Auburn, had a fantastic game on the ground. 116 yards and 101 yards on 16 carries, and had a phenomenal game. Just went all off on them boys, and it was crazy. Gronk was pretty much shut down for New England. So was Hogan. They could not get the ball to anyone. They couldn't get any offense moving. But Michael Jones Jr. looked great, receiving a touchdown. Golden Tate, who's been there for about 5 years now out of Notre Dame, looks good. And it looks like Matt Stafford's starting to roll back into form because, as we all know, Matt Stafford, pretty winning quarterback, and he's got Matt Patricia, who's a very smart guy who learned under Bill Belichick, able to pull this win off. And I think this is where the wins start for Detroit, which would be big for them because Detroit is definitely on the map and ready to go. And a couple of things here. The Patriots' pass distribution, he threw 7 times to wide receivers. 3 of them were caught for 27 yards. He threw 4 times to his tight ends. 3 times for 43 yards. He threw 9 times to his running backs. 5 were caught for 35 yards. So that is not a fantastic game by the Patriots whatsoever. And then people say, well, they don't have a very good record. They're 1-2. It's not good at all. But people seem to forget the last time they went 1-2 was 2012. They lost in the conference championship. But the year before that was 2001, and they won the Super Bowl. So don't panic yet. And Brady got his first start in 2001. I understand that. As a rookie, now he's a veteran, has a better defense than he had last year, and better wide receivers. They'll be okay. Watch out for New England. It's early. They've always struggled in September. They find a way to get hot. Not this game, but next. This is week number 4. So week 5, watch out for New England to turn it on. They're going to go to the next level because they will have all their weapons back. I believe that's when you see the activation of Josh Gordon and they get back Edelman. So I think it's time, Amendola. I think it's time for this team to get ready and go. So watch out for New England. I understand it's early in the year, but watch out. They're going to be a team to be reckoned with as they got beat by their old defensive coordinator 26-10 on Sunday Night Football. And one that is a surprise to me is the New York Football Giants headed to Houston, and they knocked the Houston Texans off 27-22, making them 0-3 in the season. I had the Texans going second in that division. Pretty shocked by that. Deshaun Watson had not too bad of a game for a quarterback, but he can't do it all by himself. 385 yards, 2 touchdowns, and interception. He can't do it all himself. He needs a little bit of help there. He didn't quite have what he needed. They didn't have much of a rushing game either because Alfred Blue and Lamar Miller only ran for a combined total together of 23 yards. The most of the yards came from Deshaun Watson, who ran for 36. So they combined as a team for 59 rushing yards, which you can't do in the NFL. You have to run the football. Saquon Barkley himself for New York had more yards on rushing than the other team did. Saquon went and had a fantastic day. Just not even running the ball, catching it as well. He had 17 carries, 82 yards, and a touchdown, his longest being a 24-yard run. He also was catching balls out of the backfield, 5 receptions, 35 yards. That is a guy you need to watch. He is a phenom, folks. I am telling you. Odell Beckham had a fantastic game. 9 receptions, 109 yards. He gets 100 yards, they look good. I know they tend to lose, but this one here is one that goes on the win slate for him when he gets over 100 yards. So mark one up for Odell on that side of it. Sterling Shepard, 6 for 80 and a TD. Great game all around for the Giants. Eli Manning, 297 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. Back to his old ways. He took 4 sacks, though, for a loss of 32 yards. So big losses there. Just Deshaun Watson struggling coming back. The defense isn't there for him. Will Fuller looks good on the offensive side, catching balls for him, and so does DeAndre Hopkins. But they need to find a way to get that rushing game going because they can't get the secondary to step up. Once they get them to crowd the box, maybe that'll open the passing game up more for Deshaun Watson. They are unable to do that. But with the big win, the New York Football Giants, I'm so ecstatic about that because I got the Giants finishing second in that division and making the playoffs. So a huge win there. A little upset to see the Texans start 0-3 on the year. Thought they were going to be a little better, especially considering the season that Deshaun started off with last year before tearing his ACL. But that is all the time we have here on this episode of the RedLine NFL Sports Talk. Make sure you tune back in next 5 to catch out who Red's Power 5 are and to get a breakdown of some of the big marquee matchups. We'll see you next week on the RedLine.